Goffstown. Welcome to another edition of Goffstown School Board Watch, where public comment is always open. I'm your host, Donna Pinard, and I have the fortunate company today of Rich Gerard of Gerard at Large, 90.7 FM WLMW. He is on from Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. till 9 a.m. Welcome.
Thank you, Donna.
Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
Having you here because you recently had an interview with one of our selectmen from Goffstown.
Scott Gross. Yep.
Scott Gross, talking about
Mountain View Middle School.
Mountain View Middle School madness, as you call it.
Yes,
on your
the
radio.
madness at Mountain View.
Okay, and he was calling for?
The resignation of Jim Hunt, the principal of the school.
Should Jim Hunt, the principal in question, be removed?
In my opinion, I would like to see him resign.
So anyway, one of the reasons why.
And that was Monday morning, the 29th of October.
Yes, if anyone wants to look it up on your blog, on my blog.
Well, no, that would be in our archive at gerardatlarge.com. Scroll down a little bit on the left, you'll see a show archive button, and you can click on the link and just look for the 29th. And you'll see the box and follow the directions, and you'll be able to listen to the interview, which we have separated out on its own from the hour it was done in.
Okay, so just under Scott Gross. Yeah, go ahead and look for that and listen.
But on my blog, I have all kinds of fun stuff about my right to know requests that have been ongoing in this district for any number of issues. Simple questions here don't get answered very well.
A lot of secrecy here in Goffstown.
I find it actually very interesting as somebody who has spent some 20 years either in government or covering government, mostly in Manchester. The degree to which the administration and your school board officials here go to not answer questions. I've never experienced anything quite like it, to be honest with you.
The underlying problem, of course, is that our school board does not hold our superintendent accountable, obviously. So they, I'm sure, are listening, or at least someone in the SAU office is listening to your radio show every day and hearing the kinds of things that you report on the fact that she doesn't answer. I love the fact that you have to keep throwing it back to her.
Yes.
And you call it a fast food restaurant, kind of window where, okay, here it comes back to you because you didn't answer it appropriately.
Well, and the nice part about doing it all through email is that I can post it up on my website, and all but the most recent interactions that I've had are all there. If my blog is called Oh My Blog at gerardatlarge.com, and a simple search for Stacy Buckley or Goffstown School Board or whatnot will pull up many entries. Going back, we first started reporting on what was happening with the Mountain View Middle School and started raising questions about who is doing what back in May. And there has been entry after entry after entry after email after email after email. And I find it very difficult to get straight answers to pretty direct questions. And I've found everything from what I consider to be improper handling of non-public sessions, improper sealing of minutes from non-public sessions, to, I think, the whole RFP process that was gone through to select the consultant that is now doing the review of Mountain View Middle School. I found that whole process to be certainly a violation of the policies of the school board, as I understand them from reading them, and maybe even potential violations of law and how things were handled. Clearly, your superintendent picking up the telephone and individually soliciting outside of a public process with a scope of services requested, a bid, a request for proposal, and any sort of advertised criterion on what is going to guide the decision as to who gets the bid. You might be able to get away with that if you're looking to service a couple of vehicles that need an oil change, in which case, typically if it's under $5,000, you make at least 3 phone calls, you solicit 3 bids by phone, but anything over that, even by Goffstown School Board's own policies, you're supposed to go through an official proposal. So I've found a number of things as I have watched what's happened here and inquired to be mind-boggling, really. I mean, the vice chairman of your school board, Diane McCarthy, working for one of the bidders. Now, she can say what she wants, and I have an email from her about only being part-time or working for a different division of the company. Your conflict of interest policy here that governs your school board is pretty clear about what people are supposed to do, and she's in total violation of that.
Nor did she even reveal it.
Well, which is part of the policy. The policy is you must disclose and you must recuse. In other words, you cannot participate in not only the discussions, but certainly not the votes. Yet she participated in every discussion. She participated in every vote, including a critical tie-breaking vote that allowed this process to move forward. And the only vote that she didn't participate in was the vote to award the bid, which went to not her employer, but one of the competitors of her employer in the process. So,
And you asked her the question, why didn't you make that vote as well?
yeah, no answer.
Afraid of your job, maybe?
I don't know.
The
No
interesting thing is that she was actually...
Of all the votes to cast, she should have cast a vote in favor of that one. That way she could turn around and say, well, I voted for the one that, the superintendent thought was best and didn't happen to be my employer. So you see, I really wasn't in the tank for my employer, but she abstained. Now, in the email she did send me back in May, she said she would abstain from a final vote awarding a contract, but that still doesn't satisfy the conflict of interest policy that governs the school board. And shame on the other members of the school board for not calling her out on it. Shame on the administration. Right. And speaking of administration, what is this where you have folks like Keith Allard in the newspaper saying, oh, well, she doesn't have to solicit bids for that. It's a specialty service. It's not like these national companies are going to be reading local newspapers. Well, but that's not the point. The point is when you have a publicly announced request for proposal process, which is what you have to do in government when you solicit services, the public is aware that their tax dollars are potentially going to be spent. The public is aware that there are criterion by which these proposals are going to be adjudged. The public is aware of the basis of the awards based on the services solicited. There's nothing that says that Stacy Buckley, your superintendent, can't pick up the phone and invite proposals based on a request for proposal that's been issued. Here, we're looking for these services. We know your company's out in California, probably doesn't know about it. Here's the bid. Would you consider bidding? Entirely above board.
Right.
But no bid, no RFP, no formal process. Independent solicitations that apparently weren't publicly authorized by the school board, and when they finally came forward and they did the request for proposal, we'd like to think that our adorable little radio show is one of the reasons why.
I'm sure it is, because otherwise why do it?
Because we pounded on it. But in the rest of the world, before a request for proposal is sent out, the governing body, in this case the school board, is supposed to authorize its development and approve its issuance. One of the right-to-know requests I sent to Stacy Buckley was, well, could you point, please, to a specific action of the board, either authorizing its, approving its development or authorizing its issuance? And she sent me minutes, I think it was from the June 4th or June 18th meeting of the school board, and I read them. And I
didn't give her any authorization.
No, it didn't give any authorization whatsoever. And she came back and said, well, it didn't, the policies don't require it. Well, yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
If I remember correctly, there's a $5,000 threshold over which you must issue an RFP. And at least in Manchester, which is what I'm most familiar with, we've got our school board right now has got several requests for proposals, one for a superintendent search committee, one for an educational audit, and a couple others. The school board took an action to request that the superintendent develop those RFPs. Once those RFPs are developed, depending on the action of the board, they'll either be issued or they'll be brought forward to the school board for authorization to be issued. None of this happened at your school board over Mountain View Middle School. Not a thing. No. And there are some who have complained that the requests for proposal that were issued specifically were written to exclude Professor Hampton, Ben Hampton, and his group, because one of the things, this is interesting, one of the things that they required in the bid was a copy of a study previously done by the bidding group as proof that they had experience. Well, Professor Hampton, for all of his experience and all of his certifications and all of the credentials of the team, had never worked together as a team before in this capacity, and therefore did not have a study that they could provide. Interestingly, West Ed, the company that got the bid, also failed to provide a study. They did not provide a study. They did not provide a link to a study that could be accessed online as requested. What they did was they provided a summary of studies that they had done, and overwhelmingly they were elementary school studies, not middle school studies. And
Right.
so
why WestEd?
I don't know.
And WestEd was one of those companies that she initially contacted
Yes.
and solicited. So
Yes.
who knows what she actually told them?
Well, and
I'm sure she actually told them what kind of outcome she was looking for, which is why some of the staff people at Mountain View Middle School, who have been criticized by Goffstown News, and some of the townspeople as well, for believing that this study, which has now been granted to WestEd, will be a farce, that the whole procedure is a farce.
Well, I can't speak to that, but I can speak to this. I actually had to file a right-to-know request to get the superintendent's office to release the 4 bids that were submitted as part of the official process. And after I, under right-to-know, demanded that they be released, they were. And I asked to have them faxed to me. And I got an email back. It's kind of funny. It said, now that would be too much work because there's something like 85 pages and they're in binders. All right, so I said, I'll go down to the superintendent's office and I'll look for them. And I went in there and I spoke with the, I forget her name, the secretary out there, very pleasant lady. And I asked for them, she said, oh, they're right here on my desk. I said, oh, so you've been waiting for me. She said, oh, no, these are public documents. The public has a right to review these. I said, right, so they're sitting on your desk, nonetheless. So,
Yeah, because Stacy cares a lot about the public getting those documents, yeah.
no, they weren't available until after I did file the right-to-know request. And so, in the binders they were in, what are they, those like report covers that have got the little, yeah. So she would have had to pull out about half a dozen staples. Anyway, I sat there in the office because they wouldn't let me go to a conference room or a place where there were a table or a desk. I couldn't leave the reception area.
Yeah, they didn't want you to be too comfortable.
No, and I reviewed reviewed the bids. I took a lot of notes on the bids. The WestEd bid was missing a couple of the required resumes. But I will say this. I thought that the bid that was most responsive was Suresk's bid. The personnel that they identified had clearly had extensive hands-on middle school experience. They were either former principals, former teachers. They had been in the buildings. Not so much at WestEd. Very limited, and most of it appeared to be sort of, I've consulted at a middle school or two, but not. It didn't seem that the 3 people who were going to be part of the study were actually hands-on with, certainly not as extensive as Suresk.
Okay.
Suresk did include a copy of a prior study, and guess what? It was of a middle school. And their bid was fully $7,000 less. It was $27,100, I think, to Suresk's $35,682, I think, 582. So it was significantly less money, but the odd part about the Suresk bid was the deadline was the 12th of September. Suresk's bid showed up on the 13th. The transmittal letter, the date of the proposal, everything was a day late. So I'm wondering whether or not they were disqualified because they missed the date. I did ask that question. I have not yet gotten
received
an
an
answer.
answer.
Professor Hampton's bid, I thought, was perhaps the most interesting one because he had an entirely different, and all of the people on Ben's team, had, sufficient qualifications to be doing the job. And one of the members of their team was actually an online survey expert. And Professor Hampton's team had a very different process to obtain and evaluate information, which I thought was interesting. The thing I liked about his is I could read it. It was in plain English. The other one was in a lot of edu-speak, as I like to say.
Education-ese, yes.
But technically, he didn't have a study of a prior study, which was required by the bid. So that's why I think some people think that the bids were written specifically to disqualify them. She knew he didn't have the study.
And she knew that he had offered to do it for free prior to the RFP because she hadn't issued she didn't follow the process. She didn't follow process. She's big on asking staff to follow process.
Yeah. So,
but it doesn't apply to her.
And his bid was $1 plus, the school district, if they needed copies of stuff, they'd have to pay for it. All of the bidders were asked for follow-up costs if there were training, if there were meetings, interesting. The follow-up costs for West Ed could be up to $4,000 a day.
And that's my concern. My concern is that West Ed is going to spend the $35,500 that they've already, and then say, when it comes time to interview past staff about what has happened at Mountain View Middle School, they're going to say, well, that's going to cost more.
Well, I would think if they're trying to assess the situation there, that they would speak to people who left the building for whatever reason, whether they retired, transferred, resigned. It just say, because the people who are no longer in the building, especially those who are no longer in the district, have got nothing to lose by coming clean.
Correct.
And one of the concerns that Professor Hampton had was, and the way they set up, the way they were going to collect the data, was they wanted to ensure that everybody would be comfortable giving information without being exposed.
Correct.
And they were concerned that if they went into the premises and were seen talking to teacher A or teacher B, or they set up an off-premises site, that they could be spied on, which
Correct.
sounds a little conspiratorial, but this is
It
a
is.
small town.
No, yeah, it is.
But so that's why their methodology, which I thought was pretty interesting, was the way it was. But clearly the one, in my opinion, that should have been awarded, if you were to go specifically by the requirements of the bid, was Ceresc.
Ceresc.
I can't see why, unless they were disqualified because the
turned it
dates
in
were the
late.
13th, I can't see why you'd go with West Ed over Ceresc. Certainly I didn't see any great improvement in what would be offered based on their bid. And frankly, if Ceresc were disqualified because it was a day late, you could have made an argument, since West Ed didn't provide a study either, that Professor Hampton, whose
Right.
team was more than qualified, whose approach was logical and sound, at least to my never-to-be-humble opinion, given that he was going to charge $1, fine. And you know what? It seems to me that they had a win-win situation there. They could have gone with West Ed, and they could have gone with Professor Hampton, since he was going to cost them $1, and
Right.
said, you know what? Let's get input from two different people, since we can run a concurrent study. And by the way, in terms of when it was going to wrap up, I believe that Professor Hampton's was the shortest time frame.
Right.
And I just, the whole thing strikes me as pretty bizarre.
And we could still do that. In
Right.
fact, I would encourage the Goffstown School Board to do that. Just get Ben Hampton to do a study as well.
And having spoken with Ben, I'm sure he'd be glad to do it.
In fact, the guy who's the head of West Ed out in California said the same thing. Let's do 2 studies. There's nothing wrong with having 2 reports. So, Stacy, let's do 2 studies.
So, and it's not like I can go back into the minutes of the meeting of the school board where that recommendation to hire West Ed was accepted, because it seems to me that the school board members Cloutier decided that they had some questions, and Stacy Buckley, see, this is part of the process problem that I have.
Right.
If she had gone to the Goffstown School Board and said, folks, I need to talk to you in non-public session about all of the bids that we've received. There are certain pros, there are certain cons, there are certain things that kind of measure up but kind of don't, and I'd like to get the board's input and direction before I finalize negotiations. That would have been an entirely appropriate and proper use of non-public session.
Right.
However, she didn't do that. She came to the school board with a recommendation.
Correct.
And the recommendation was to pick one company over
All
the
the
other
others,
3.
right.
Now, at that point, if you have determined who is going to get the bid, to say, well, we need to discuss this in non-public session when school board members start asking questions, seeking justification for the recommendation. What is the basis of your recommendation? She says, oh, well, we have to talk about that in non-public session because it might give the other bidders the opportunity to tweak their bid and somehow
Right.
provide them with an unfair advantage. Really, you're making a recommendation here.
Right.
What would be unfair about having that discussion in public? We chose West Ed because da-da-da-da-da-da and da-da-da-da-da-da. You don't even need to speak about the others. Would it have been probably say, well, gee, we would have liked to have considered Ceresc, but they showed up a day late. We would have liked to have considered Professor Hampton, but he didn't have a required study. I mean, there was nothing that they could have talked about in public session
Right.
that would have been providing an advantage, an unfair advantage to any of the other bidders. And by the way, I've seen something like that happened in the city of Manchester. It's happened twice with the health insurance contract. So I'm somewhat sensitive to what she was saying.
Right.
But by the same token, she was making a recommendation, and I think if you're a public official,
Right.
making a recommendation to a publicly elected board, in response to their questions, you don't say, "Oh, well, we have to go into non-public session." I'm sorry, you're making a recommendation.
You should have, right.
But she didn't follow a proper process, and
then they actually vote to accept her recommendation with no information whatsoever against their own ethics policy that they all signed except for Dan Cloutier.
the ethics policy that
voted
says
no.
that they will not vote unless they have all of the relevant necessary information. So
Right.
they violated their conflict of interest policy because of how they allowed Diane McCarthy to continue to participate even though her employer was a bidder. They violated their ethics policy because they took a vote without obtaining all of the necessary and available information. They violated the request for proposal policy because they did not authorize or approve or authorize the issuance of an RFP. They did not hold the superintendent accountable for her non-public solicitation of bidders in the first place. And this thing has just been one catastrophe after another. At some point, you have to wonder whether or not they're just buffoons or they really don't care about the process, the laws, and the policies that govern it. And at some point, if I were Ben Hampton or I were Ceresk or I were any one of the other bidders, I could see myself having a discussion with my legal counsel about whether or not this process was fair and proper, because every single one of those companies, every single one of those bidding groups have time, have money, have effort invested in the process. Now, maybe it's not a lot, but how do the members of the public, how do you, the Goffstown taxpayers, know that the $35,582, whatever it was, paid to West Ed was the best that could be done, especially when you had two bids, one for $27,000 and one for $1 from arguably qualified bidding groups that were proposed to do the same work.
And who's going to hold them accountable?
Well, at this point, I think what's happened is clearly the Goffstown School Board, in my never to be humble opinion, does not, because even when I've asked Phil Pancoast to come on the show, I've asked Diane McCarthy to come on the show. I've asked Stacy Buckley to come on the show. I saw her at the Pumpkin Regatta. I was introduced to her there, and she was mad at me. She says, "Well, you don't say nice things about me on the radio." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what. It might have something to do with the fact that I don't get simple answers to simple questions."
Job performance. We're just criticizing job performance.
I said, "But I think you'll find if you actually sit down and talk to me and try to explain these things that I'm far more reasonable because I'm getting information and having a dialogue, and I'm not getting the Heisman Trophy treatment." One of the questions that I asked her, because I had received information from one of my sources, that there had been some scuttlebutt that West Ed was going to subcontract with Ceresk to actually do the work.
Right.
Well, I asked her about that, and she sent me back the language in the bid document. And I said, "Yeah, I know that. I read the RFP." I said, "But that doesn't answer the question as to whether or not West Ed can contract with an individual or a company and under their auspices to conduct the study. Are they limited to only the personnel whose resumes they send you?" Then I got another answer, and I said, I'm not trying to be fake here. It's a simple yes or no question. It's all I want to know. Can they do it? Yes or no? And that was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting for the answer.
Right. And she feels like she doesn't have to answer you.
Well, that's
because
pretty
she
clear.
doesn't feel like the people in Goffstown or New Boston or Dunbarton have a right to know.
And by contrast, you mentioned New Boston. I spoke with the chairman of their school board there because I filed a right to know request to get the survey comments that were there, and he said, "Yeah, you should be able to have it." And he was very shy about saying who got what, in part because he had just gone through the death of a family member, and things were a little unsettled for him at the moment. But he was perfectly reasonable to talk to. He was, perfectly willing to send me the requested information. They are concerned about what's happening at the Mountain View Middle School. The 130 comments, I have a tally, not at all favorable from the parents of New Boston about what's happening at Mountain View. And they know there's a problem there, and they're concerned about it. So he, I guess, was, you know, I'm not going to, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but
At least he answered you.
at least he answered
Can
me,
he go
and I
back to
guess
you?
I guess it would be something of a surprise to know that that information had to be gotten the way I had to get it. Because the superintendent of schools, and I believe also the chairman of your school board, Phil Pankos,
Pankos.
have that study in full.
They did.
They have the comments
They
that
did
were
have
there.
it, and did not even issue it to the other school board members.
And that's wrong. That's public document. That's public data paid for by the public. And that there is no justification under the law whatsoever for the withholding of that information.
But they're above the law.
Well, they
They're
better
better
be
than
careful
law.
because there's something called the Office of Public Integrity at the Attorney General's office, and at some point, someone's going to come to the conclusion that their continued willful withholding of information like that is a violation of the right to know law. Now, that's something that gets civilly adjudicated here in the state of New Hampshire. It's not a criminal issue. But someone's going to file a lawsuit, and when Goffstown loses that lawsuit, like many towns before it, they're going to end up paying the attorney's fees and other costs of the people who filed the lawsuit. It's pretty clear. The law is actually alarmingly clear about what is and is not allowed. And what your school board routinely does with the sealing of minutes,
Right.
you know, the sealing of minutes has to be a roll call vote, not a head nod, not an aye or it has to be, you know, committeeman so-and-so, yes or no. It has to be 2/3 and a 2/3 vote, a roll call vote of those members present and voting, and it can only be under certain instances of the law.
Right.
One
And
of,
they've been doing it wrong for years.
and it should stop.
Which makes you wonder, since Stacy Buckley didn't have any experience as a superintendent before she got here, is it because she just doesn't know? But she's been here long enough that she should have made it her business
Well-
and her job qualifications. She should have made it part of her job to find out.
Well, I'll tell you what, your school board chairman and other school board members that I have asked for information have always referred them to the superintendent because she handles right-to-know requests. But if Goffstown School District is like any other school district, they have legal counsel on retainer.
Oh, yes.
Now, they might have to pay him $150 or $250 to write an opinion as to whether or
Oh,
not
he
they
shows
should
up,
release
yes,
stuff.
often.
But
But only when dealing with teachers. Yeah, that's when he shows
but
up.
I would think that where you have a member of the media pressing right-to-know requests at them, that they would get, you know, they would consult with their counsel, and if they did consult with their legal counsel, I'm pretty sure they'd find that the information that I have requested over and over and over and over and over again, some of which, by the way, she's refused to give, but it pops up at a meeting of the school board, like the grant that paid for Ceres to come in and train members of the
Right.
Mountain View Middle School. She kept telling me, oh, I don't know any of the finances. You have to get that from Hampton. No, under the law, you have to provide it to me.
Right.
And you mean to tell me that you don't know how much money you got from the town of Hampton to pay your grant? She said, well, I don't have, I said, fine, then give me the invoices. You have to have your, that's all public. She said, oh, well, that's when it came out, it was a grant from Hampton. First, it went from, it doesn't fall under the threshold, it wasn't more than the threshold requiring an RFP.
Right.
And when I asked for the invoices, well, we don't have those. Hampton gave, we shared a grant with Hampton. Well, how much was the grant? Well, you'd have to ask Hampton. Really? You don't know how much money you got from the town of Hampton to train your staff?
And yet, at a later school board meeting, it was reported out when they got all the teachers there to talk about how it was implemented.
Yeah.
Oh, all of a sudden, the amount of that grant from Hampton was reported
Yeah,
out.
so clearly,
So, Stacy, what's with the big secret?
well, clearly she doesn't like me because I'm making her life miserable, and that's fine. If she thinks that by
Follow the process.
if she thinks that by playing these games with me, she's somehow
She's good at
winning
games.
something.
Yes.
I just come and tell my story at television and let people make their own decisions. But I think the real problem that you have here in Goffstown is not so much your superintendent, but so much as it is your school board members who I think have grown insular and insulated, who seem to think that it's their job to protect and advance the causes of the superintendent and not to make sure that the policies of the board are followed, A, by their fellow members, B, by their administration and staff, and C, to be there to honestly do the bidding of the people who put them in office.
They don't even follow their own policies themselves.
No, and
so
but there's only
how
one,
can they require it of the superintendent and then building principals when they don't follow their own policies?
right. Well, there is something to be said for your superintendent saying, well, gee, I would like to do that, Chairman so-and-so or Mrs. so-and-so, but you would need to change the adopted policies of the school board because I would be in violation of the policy. Now, here's why the superintendent might want to do that. Because if the superintendent, for example, doesn't follow a bid process and there's a policy about it, and I'm one of the people who participated in that process, and I didn't get the bid, but I don't think I got a fair shake, then I get to take that policy and I get to go to court and say, here's the policy, Your Honor. They did not follow their own policy. As a result, I don't believe that I was treated equally in the process, and I believe it was prejudicially given to somebody else. Now, whether they win that case or not, how much money is the town of Goffstown or the school district going to spend to defend that lawsuit? Right. And somebody will do it. And I think the arrogance of some of the members of your school board.
Yes.
And I'll be honest, I don't know any of them personally.
Right.
I've only met them through my time on the radio from time to time. I've had Dan Kluter on my radio show a couple times because people recommended he came on, so I said, okay, come on. But just the arrogance with which they conduct themselves and the insularity that they have, to me is shocking. There isn't a one of them that would ever survive in the city of Manchester. It doesn't get played that way in the city. And the city's got its issues, but it's got by and large, it's got a very open, above board public process. Now, I've had right to know issues with them too, and I've had a conversation or two, just shy of a lawsuit, because I won't get into the details here, but it's far more open. And but like in Goffstown, when people want to hide certain things that might be embarrassing to them, they pull this meeting with council or this non-public session stunt, and then they seal the minutes, and they say, oh, well, we didn't do anything. Well, really? Under what provision of the law did you seal the minutes? Well, no, I'm sorry, there isn't one that says because I wanted to.
Right.
Was it an act of terrorism? Are people's lives at stake? Would it damage the reputation of somebody other than a member of the board? Is there ongoing litigation that disclosure of the material would compromise your case before the court? I mean, those are the exceptions. Those are the reasons why you do it. None of this falls under any of those reasons.
No, and they've gotten in the habit of sealing it every single time. Let's seal the minutes. Let's seal the minutes.
Right, but if you take a look at what
everything's a big secret, and under that guise of everything being a big secret, they can operate any way they want to.
Well, but if you take a look at even what the New Hampshire School Boards Association says about the sealing of minutes, they flat out say, don't do it.
Right, but again, they don't have to listen to anybody because they're above that.
Well, the people of Goffstown need to change that, and the way they need to change that is, they're the members of the board of the school board that don't agree with these procedures. I think they need to be vocal about it in public session. I think they need to not worry about whether or not, I'm not saying they do, but not worry about whether or not things are going to be all pleasant by the cookies and cake table they have before their meetings.
Exactly.
And they need to start asking questions like, well, why isn't it a violation of the conflict of interest policy to have Diane McCarthy not disclose her employment with one of the bidders and not recuse herself from the discussions or the votes? Why? And start asking those questions, because at that point, the people who watch these things on TV, or they hear about them on my radio show, or they read about them in the newspaper, because they're becoming issues now, have the opportunity as voters to say, well, wait a minute.
Especially since Diane McCarthy is up for re-election this coming spring. Yeah. And here's the thing is that as soon as she was exposed by GoffstownToday.com, Bill Wynne actually exposed her as an employee of Ceresc. Her husband gave Bill Wynne a call saying she doesn't really work for Ceresc. She gets paid via a grant. Yeah, a grant that goes to Ceresc. So I'm really concerned that if something happens to you, Diane, your husband doesn't know where you're working. And it's really kind of dangerous not to have your husband know where to come pick you up in case something happens.
But I mean, one of the things that I did, and I don't know if Bill beat me to the punch on this one or I beat him to it. It doesn't matter. But I went to Ceresc's website. She's on the staff directory.
She is.
She has her own extension. The program that she works for is clearly one that's administered by them. There's clearly an association there. And even if Diane is entirely above board in saying, well, really, because of this and because of that, I really don't have an association. Let's just take that at face value. In today's world especially, where people put more and more of a premium on the appearance of impropriety being an impropriety, I think you have the requirement to be above board, to go that extra step. And she could have said, you know, for the record, this is my arrangement with Ceresc. This is how I'm associated with that affiliation. And she could have made the statement that as a result of this, there really is no direct connection, and therefore, unless the board feels differently, I'm going to participate, because whether or not they get the bid has nothing to do with my little piece of the world over here. She should have brought it forward. Your conflict of interest policy requires that.
Right.
Okay, but she didn't do that. And I would ask her, as I have, well, if you are not going to vote on awarding the contract, because that would be a conflict of interest, why is not every discussion leading and every discussion and vote leading to that award also not a conflict of interest?
Remove yourself from the table even.
Especially since it got to a point where it was awarded because she broke the tie vote at a point in time where Buckley was looking for approval of the board to continue, given all of the controversy.
Which in my never humble opinion is unethical. You should not have voted Diane McCarthy.
No, she shouldn't.
You should have stayed out of it.
She shouldn't have, because at that point what she was really doing was casting a vote that made it possible for her employer to continue to be in a position where it could have received the bid.
And we need ethical people on the school board.
And
so should she decide to run again, Goffstown, please
well, and you know
vote
what?
her out.
Well, you know, but here's the irony. Okay, here's the irony of the whole thing. I really think that Ceresc had the best bid.
True. But if why the secrecy? Why hiding it? Why isn't there any transparency? And why?
So she very well could have cost her company the bid, because how do I know? How does anybody know that Stacey Buckley didn't pick West Ed to avoid putting Diane McCarthy in a position where, whether she voted or not, people were going to say the fix was in.
Right. Exactly.
How do we know that? And that's the problem when people aren't just above board. We don't know why West Ed was recommended.
And this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to come in and talk about this, is because this has been going on. You have been covering this since May, and yet when Selectman Scott Gross was on your show, he didn't know that part. He didn't know about the cover-up of Diane McCarthy.
No.
The other thing he didn't know about is that chairman of the SAU board, Keith Allard, while he was chairman of the Goffstown School Board, was pulling things out of school board members' mailboxes.
I actually have a letter that he sent to a former staff member saying that he pulled her stuff out of the school board's mailboxes because it was inappropriate and it wasn't following the proper process, and how, more or less, how dare she go directly to school board members. Oh yeah, I have all of this information.
Accusing teachers of not following process. Hypocrites.
But so, and I was talking to Scott in between show segments, and I referred him to, I would refer you, go to my blog, which is my blog at gerardatlarge.com. Just type in Stacey Buckley in the search bar. You'll see every email. And the beauty of this thing is it's not me reporting on it, although I've written, some stories. Sure. Primarily, I just released all the emails we exchanged.
Right.
I just released the emails we exchanged.
And that teacher who did eventually mail it to the school board members' homes in order for them to have the documentation she wanted them to get, she bypassed Keith Allard. It got mailed out. I know of another teacher, similar situation. He took it out of the mailboxes and wouldn't let it go through. That teacher chose not to send it. And spend the money to copy and put the postage on it and send it to their home.
I have it all. I've withheld at their request releasing it, but I have it all and I can verify that it exists. The thing, the trouble that I have with what's going on here is, and I don't think it's going to happen because the school board seems vested in covering up its decisions and its neglect of its oversight role of the administration. First of all, I have no idea why in a school district your size, that the superintendent and the assistant superintendents need an outside consultant to evaluate what's going on at the middle school. It's not like it's a big school district. the city, the west side of Manchester has got more school kids than your entire, the school district in the city of Manchester, with its teachers, its staff, and its students, is bigger than the town of Goffstown, the school district.
Right.
So your schools in Goffstown they're smaller than the number of schools that we have on the west side. We have a high school, a middle school, and 3 elementary schools on the west side of Manchester.
Right.
And the city of Manchester has, and I think it is understaffed, but has a superintendent, an assistant for curriculum, and an assistant for special ed. In a school district the size of this one, there's absolutely, in my opinion, and I agree with Scott Gross on this. Scott Gross said, well, before I voted for the RFP, I would have wanted to see a superintendent's report.
Right. Let's have her do her job first.
Let's have her do her job.
And
That's
then
right.
see if an independent study agrees with her opinion.
But if I were the school board,
Because now we can't even verify her incompetence. It won't be out there.
and if I were the school board in this case, I'd not only be taking a look at what was going on at Mountain View Middle School, but I would have been in favor of broadening the scope to include the efficacy of the actions of my central administration.
Absolutely.
Because I've got copies of letters from teachers that have that complaints that have been sent to Stacey Buckley and her replies. Horrifying stuff. I mean, 2, 3, 4-page letters detailing all of these things. I've received your letter. Let me know if there's any problem. It's just bizarre. Well, is it incompetence or is there a cover-up of incompetence? I don't know what's going on there.
It's a cover-up.
But, at some point, the school board members have got to be more concerned about what's happening in the SAU office and what's happening in the schools, and whether or not the SAU office is addressing or ignoring or making excuses for what's happening in the buildings.
Which is why I keep trying to encourage Mountain View Middle School teachers that if you send a complaint to Stacey Buckley, make sure you send it to the school board as well, because she will just pretend it doesn't exist if you send it only to her.
I would take that a step further. I would say send it to a guy like me, because really, people are afraid of what will happen if, they speak out. Well, here's the truth. Publicity is the best protection you can have.
Absolutely.
If they come down on you, now, if you get publicity, you're going to have to make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's. But
Correct.
if they try to run you out of town, so to speak, everything they do will be under a microscope, and if it looks like retaliation, they've got a really big problem, because you might have whistleblower protection.
Right.
So, publicity is the only true defense. The light of day is the only thing that dispels darkness, right?
Absolutely.
So publicity, in speaking out and letting people know what's going on really is like a coat of armor around you, because it puts anything that is done by you or done potentially to you under a microscope.
Correct.
So you might have to be on your best behavior.
So please, I know, for instance, of a teacher who filed a complaint against Mr. Hunt to Stacey Buckley at the beginning of this year, the month of September. I would encourage that teacher to write up that complaint and send copies to the school board, because Stacey can act in the spring when it comes time to reissue contracts. She can act like that. Oh, this particular school year didn't come through. There's been no complaints this year, which is something she might say. But if you copy it to the school board, then she cannot say to them, I didn't get any complaints. No one came to me, which she's famous for doing. So please, teachers, I beg of you, if you file a complaint, send it to the school board.
I think,
send it to Rich Gerard.
My gut instinct is that I think clearly Stacey Buckley knows there's a problem there at Mountain View Middle School. But for whatever reason, my gut instinct is that somehow she's going to be, she feels responsible for that problem and may feel culpable for that problem, and is worried about the repercussions of that problem being known. And it might call into question her performance as the superintendent.
Correct.
So it's better to try to handle it this way, so that people can never really get to the bottom of it, rather than to say, you know what? And Scott Gross basically said this on my radio show. He was on the school board that hired Jim Hunt.
Right.
And he can look back on it and say, whether it's right or whether it's wrong, he's become a distraction at the school, and it's taking away from our ability to educate the kids. and attract and just have an overall good environment. Therefore, since it has now become about him, he needs to go. So basically what he's saying is, yeah, that didn't work out so well. We need to have a change there. And I think he's probably more interested in getting a different result than I think he's more interested in getting it right than he is in being right. And right now, I think your superintendent and your school board are more interested in being right than in getting it right.
Now, and here's the interesting thing, is because
I don't know what to say about a school board member who pulls from the mailbox of other school board members material sent to them by a teacher. Absolutely. I don't know what that is. I don't know why he feels so threatened or so aggrieved that he has to take that action. But
because he and Stacy are friends, so now it becomes a protection.
But they're not there to
I
be
don't want her
friends.
to look bad.
You know, I'm there to be my kid's parent, not their best friend, which is probably why I have pretty good kids.
But that line gets blurred.
Well, that's a problem. He is not there to protect the superintendent. He is there to make sure that what is happening is acceptable to the people who pay the bill and have their kids go to school. He's there to ensure the education of the kids, not the well-being of the superintendent.
Correct. I think he's lost sight of that.
Well, then he needs competition in the next election.
Well, he did have competition last year, but he did get reelected. Now, he got a lot fewer votes than he ever got in elections before that. However, he still got reelected. And the only good thing that has come out of all of this is that at least for the past 3 years, we have had contested school board races. Because prior to that, if you put your name on the ballot, you were pretty much in because nobody was going to run against you. Nobody wanted the job. But at least citizens in Goffstown are now awake enough to know that there are two different types of philosophies in going forward, and one is not to be the superintendent's best buddy, but rather to be someone who's going to make sure they know their policies and that policies are followed. Right. That hasn't been happening.
And I think there's got to be a happy medium between what's happening in the school board in Goffstown and its overly chummy relationship with its superintendent, and the school board in Manchester where, you know, Tom Brennan is basically a piñata. You know, there's some
and leaving because of it, or not because of it, but
yeah,
at least
no, he's leaving. I will say he's leaving because of it. I mean, he's target practice for a board that has gone over the bend the other way.
Right.
You know, they're looking for somebody to blame for what's happening in their neck of the woods,
right.
And so they're projecting their own decisions and failures onto him, and it's a very difficult situation. But you know, so you have Goffstown on one hand, where you've got this sycophantic relationship between the school board and the superintendent, and you've got the Manchester School Board on the other end, where you have this absolutely adversarial relationship, at least between a very virile and vocal, you know, minority of school board members and the superintendent. You know, that's not the way it should be in either case. But you know, I'll tell you, I've seen a lot of crazy things in my 22 years now of working in local government. But when I was at I think it was the June 18th school board meeting, and your school board, there was a discussion about the $500,000 surplus they expected at the end of the school year.
Yes.
And then who's the older lady there with the oxygen tank? Sue Tremblay. She goes, oh, I wonder if this, I really don't want to give all this money back, she says. I wonder, you know, especially with the way the budgets are going, they keep cutting and cutting. Does the superintendent have any recommendations on what we could do with that leftover money? And Stacy Buckley, as if on cue, goes, oh, wow, funny you should ask. And she produces this list of all of the things that she wanted to spend money on.
Because they chat beforehand, again.
All of the things she wanted to spend money on, and she knew exactly the dollar amount that she was going to spend.
Isn't that amazing?
So of the $500,000 that they could have given back to the taxpayer that night, they spent $100,000. Okay, on various items, and I think it was Keith Allard who said, oh, why don't we round it up and just add $40,000 to the supply line items and pre-buy toilet paper and stuff like that for the next school year? I'm like, wow.
Not the sharpest tools in the shed.
And I was sitting there going, oh, I mean, Rogers and Hammerstein around here choreographing this thing?
Sometimes it's embarrassing.
I was
so
amazed, but I mean, now tell me, that wasn't, I mean, I may have fallen off the turnip truck a day or two ago, but the bump doesn't swell anymore. What was that?
All pre-planned. all, you know, as long as we don't have a quorum, let's go have a couple people talk in this corner. Let's have it all planned.
You know,
and yeah,
but
it's all done ahead of time.
Preposterous, preposterous. And then Phil Pancoast demanding that Bill Wynne remove his cameras from where they were, calls the police department. And Chief Sullivan, I haven't forgotten those Supreme Court cases you told me to look up. Absolutely were directly opposed to the action your police took that night. And so the cops were like, well, it's the chairman's room, the chairman's rules. If he wants those cameras moved, they have to be moved, or Mr. Wynne has to leave. Really? Well, let me tell you something. The Supreme Court of the state of New Hampshire ruled against the Fish and Game Department when it ruled that the cameras from WMUR could not be in a hearing room. And the Supreme Court of the state of New Hampshire held the actions of the chairman of the Board of Selectmen in Belmont, because there was a counselor a selectman on the board who was so disruptive to the meeting that the town business could not be conducted, and said that the chairman was within his right to have that selectman removed by the police so that the business of the town could be conducted. Now here's Bill Wynne, and I was there, I watched it.
I was there as well.
Putting his cameras apparently where he's always put them.
Where he's always put them.
Now the camera is not in anybody's line of sight. It is not in any pathway. It is not making any noise. It's not flashing any lights. It is not, other than its presence, and it was put by the table so their conversations, which are not mic'd.
Correct. The sound system in that room is horrible. It's horrid.
Well, no,
and it only goes to the camera for GTV.
Right, and that's why it hangs from the ceiling. But it was not. It was so loud in there, they actually shut off the air handling system so they could hear themselves talk. And so the chairman of the school board says that camera can't be, you can put it anywhere but there. Well, there is where it needs to be in order to pick up the audio so people can hear.
Right.
And
it was all just a power struggle.
And he orders it removed, and then your, frankly, stupid police turn around and show up and order it, and your even dumber police chief justifies it, argues it, and it tells me to look up 2 Supreme Court cases, which I did, which completely argued against his case.
Right.
And when I called him back and said exactly what disruption was being created that needed to be, so is it your, he said, well, nothing. Well, first, he hadn't read the report, so after he read the reports, and then he claimed he didn't have the reports in front of him. I said, Chief, you knew I was going to call you back. You mean to tell me that you read the reports and then you put them aside so you couldn't reference them? Really? Do you think I am that stupid? And I said, so what you're telling me is that your officers are not allowed to exercise any discretion, do any investigation. What the chairman of the board says goes. It's that it's the chairman's room, the chairman's rules. That is not what the law says.
That's not what the law says.
And to you, and for an elected
And you
official,
can't tell someone as arrogant as Phil Pancoast, who has a Napoleon complex, that is the case.
he's too tall for the Napoleon complex. But I will tell you this: for your police chief to allow his department to be used by elected officials to intimidate or otherwise make it not possible for members of the media, and Bill was there for Goffstown today, just like I was there for GerardAtLarge.com. You may not like us, but we are bona fide members of the media with bona fide recognized media outlets. What's next? My typing while the meeting is going is too distracting. You've got to put me in the back of the room so you don't hear me on the keyboards? Don't laugh. I've had people say similar things like that. Oh, it's being a disruptor. We can hear his keyboards. Oh, really? So, you've got really bad things happening in this town. And your police chief is either completely incompetent and stupid, or he's totally in the bag and corrupt with this school board thing. Or, you know what? All he needed to do was say, you know what, we need to examine the policy. Perhaps my guys could have done it a little differently. I don't think, given what I know now from the report, that they acted appropriately. If he says that, it goes away. But no, you don't say that. You make us the bad guy. You send a Supreme. I asked him, I said, did you actually read those Supreme Court cases before you referred me to them? Well, of course I did. Where exactly do you find the authority then for what just happened to happen? Name for me the distraction that required the chairman's intervention for the orderly conduct of the school board meeting. He had no answer. No answer.
It's not my choice.
Oh, it still bothers me to this day.
Now, speaking of, you mentioned the town of Belmont. Stacy Buckley applied for a job, the town Belmont, the SAU that as superintendent over there, whatever SAU number that is, I'm not quite sure. And she got the job. And after they offered it to her, she pulled out. To which I want to say, why? Why did you pull out?
I don't know.
Supposedly in a public meeting, she said it was because she wanted to be around in order to help us with the area agreement with New Boston and Dunbarton. No, it would have been okay. You could have gone. Now, Manchester has it open. Just throwing that out there.
I think, with due respect to Superintendent Buckley, I think she would be in way over her head in the city of Manchester.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
One of the reasons why I asked you is because Scott wasn't sure of all the things that are happening and the people in town.
Yeah, I did
You
refer
need
him
know.
to. I did refer him to my blog, and I did discuss some of what he didn't know, and it just goes to show. I think a lot of people are out there like Scott who are maybe following it superficially, but aren't really following all of the details. They're there. GerardAtLarge.com. My blog. Just put Stacy Buckley in the search name, or Diane McCarthy, or Phil Pancoast. You'll see everything that we've posted. There are more postings to come, but you'll see everything we've put up so far.
I beg you to do it. Please log on. Please go find out. Please educate yourself. Thank you for coming in, Rich. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for today. See you next time, Goffstown.
If it is truly about the kids, then Mr. Hunt is now a distraction. He's a distraction from the kids in the community moving forward and getting a good quality education. He's an impediment right now. And if he believes that he's right, and he has that right to believe that, or others who support him, that may be true. But there comes a time in leadership where you become a roadblock, and that's what I think he is right now.